Alright, boils and ghouls, well here we are at the last Splatterhouse game. It came out in 2010 for the PlayStation 3, and more often than not, I hear that this game is a horrible piece of crap, that basically you just push one button till all the enemies are dead. But I'm not sure I agree. So let's get down to it. Let's really dig into what this game actually is. Before I get into the game, I just have to say this start screen sucks. Listen to the noise this enemy makes. The gameplay opens with Rick laying in a puddle of his own blood, reaching for a photo of him and his girlfriend, Jennifer. The disembodied voice of the terror mask speaks to Rick, the same lines from the start of Splatterhouse 2. Rick puts on the mask, and the violent jubilations begin. Like in Splatterhouse's previous, Rick seeks to rescue Jennifer from the clutches of evil Dr. West. The story in this Splatterhouse gets a little bit of depth. Not much, a kiddie pool's worth of depth, but depth nonetheless. An eclipse approaches, and Dr. West intends on sacrificing Jennifer to bring forth creatures known as the Corrupted in the hopes of resurrecting his dead wife Lenora, who died like 130 years ago. And apparently Dr. West is that old, kept alive through magic and science or some stuff like that. Dr. West, Jennifer, Rick, and the Terror Mask jump around in time. You witness a future where Rick fails to save Jennifer and the Corrupted bring about the apocalypse. And you experience a past where Rick kills Lenora. The ending, spoiler warning, sees that Rick was committing the sacrifices that bring through the Corrupted. This being the Terror Mask's intention, so that he could beat up the Corrupted, as they are old enemies. The story isn't interesting so much as the way it's given to the audience is. Everything leading up to Rick laying in his own blood is shown in flashbacks, and much of Dr. West's story gets revealed during the game and through journal entries. And the Terror Mask gives a fair amount of commentary on everything that's going on around you. Jennifer needs rescuing, and Rick's gonna rescue her. That's pretty much all you really learn about these two people. That's it. Dr. West you get to know throughout the story, while the Terror Mask you get to know because he constantly talks. He says funny things sometimes and doesn't repeat himself too much throughout the game. The issue I take with the Terror Mask lies in the voice acting. The developer cast voice actor Jim Cummings, who is a good voice actor. I just feel the developer miscast him here. Jim Cummings has a very recognizable voice. I know he's done a good amount of acting for Saturday morning cartoons, and I recognize him easily. He makes the Terror Mask sound like a Saturday morning cartoon character. And in a game called Splatterhouse, you don't want a character called the Terror Mask to sound like he belongs in an episode of Tasmania. It takes me out of the game, and I don't like it. It makes the violence and horror elements seem goofy and cartoonish. If they had gone with something a little more evil, I think it would have worked out much better. Gameplay consists of light combat, light puzzle solving, light exploration, light platforming, and to put it in simpler terms, the game is God of War Light Splatterhouse Edition. The combat consists of the same type of combat that most games of the era used, some type of variant on the God of War combat. It seems every game around this time used this combat, like Spider-Man Shattered Dimension, Wolverine Origins, or Castlevania, to name a few. You know the gameplay control scheme already. Light attack, heavy attack, grab, block, dodge, jump, and somewhere in there you can activate a rage mode that depletes a meter somewhere on screen. In Splatterhouse, that meter sits under your health bar, and that rage mode consists of turning Rick into an even larger hulking mass of death and destruction for a limited time, much like the way it happened in Splatterhouse 3. I found myself using this as a crutch to get past swarms of larger enemies I didn't feel like bothering with. I've heard people mention that this game simply consists of mashing one button until all the enemies on screen have been pulped, and I have to disagree. The game lacks depth in the combat, but I wouldn't say the combat lacks strategy. But then again, strategy and depth, are those the same thing? I don't know. I should stop drinking. Certain enemies require certain techniques to kill, or can more easily be taken out with a large weapon or an instant kill grab. You do gain blood points in the game, which allows you to purchase new moves. However, the only move I purchased and used was the attack where you sit on top of an enemy and beat the crap out of them because, well, it was just too much fun. Rick can use an assortment of weapons in this game as well. The 2x4 and baseball bat you can beat monsters with. The machete and cleaver you can cut them to pieces with. There's the shotgun, which blows enemies away, and the chainsaw, which can be used to bisect enemies. The chainsaw is definitely the best way of saying, it's time to party, get out your hats and the firecrackers. During my playthrough, I found every one of these weapons immensely satisfying. Cutting monsters up with the cleaver leaves them standing there decapitated or leaves them cut in half, crawling away to die. Each blast of the shotgun feels powerful, and the chainsaw can turn a horde of zombies into a delightful pile of limbs in seconds. In addition to all these pleasant, violent actions you can perform, you also get to do quick time event finishing moves, very similar to God of War. Go figure. When an enemy's health falls low enough, they get a red glowing outline. Run up to them and press the grab button, and you go into a QTE. Each of these is a fast, simple way of dispatching an enemy. They're very gory and gross. I adore them. I didn't have very much trouble pulling them off for the most part. However, the number of finishers has its limits, and by the end of the game, you'll have seen all of them dozens of times and be completely bored with them. And most of them aren't even that memorable. The only ones that received an audible reaction from me was the head crush, which reminded me of Friday the 13th, and the finisher where Rick reaches into an enemy's butt and pulls out their intestines. The enemies in the game have little to offer by way of variety. The game has about 10 different monster types in it, and these monsters get reskinned repeatedly throughout the game. In a couple of instances they receive some extra moves, but it ain't much. The enemy I hated the most were these skinny little guys that often swarm me. These little bastards have the ability to lop off limbs, and yes, Rick can get his arm cut off. If this happens, all Rick can do is punch and run around. He loses the ability to jump, dodge, or block. It's a pain in the ass. When this would happen, I would resort to turning into Monster Rick or using Rick's blood siphoning ability to heal myself and regenerate my arm. If you don't have enough blood in your blood meter, you won't be able to do either of these moves and will just have to evade enemies until Rick regenerates his arm on his own. It doesn't take too long, but when the arm comes back, Rick stops moving to scream, and this leaves him open to attack. More often than not, this usually led to me getting my arm lopped off again seconds after having grown it back, because those scrawny bastards swarm and can lunge attack you, which takes off your limbs. This is easily the most frustrating thing about the game. At least you can pick up Rick's severed arm and use it as a weapon. The game also throws these glowing zombies at you that have some symbols carved into them. They suck. Rick can't touch them. He'll get knocked back. I hate this crap. The only way I beat them have been by using Rick's charged heavy attack or a weapon of some kind. These enemies simply ruined the flow of combat, and every time they showed up, the combat just turned into a chore. On a scale of 1 to 5, I give the combat a 2.5. Once you know what you're doing and how each enemy operates, you can get into the flow of combat and find simple pleasures in turning monsters into hamburger. Bosses in the game fall, unfortunately, into the category of completely forgettable. Early on, it appears that you're going to have an interesting fight with a possessed doll, but she ends up just turning into a giant junk monster, and the fight ends as a quick time event. As far as bosses go, the final boss of Splatterhouse left a great deal to be desired. It starts out appearing like it could possibly be a huge fight, but you just end up protecting Jennifer from enemies while the boss approaches in the background. When he arrives, the rest of the fight is just a quick time event. Certainly the worst part of the game. The only boss fight I found to be memorable was the chainsaw boss fight, which was a throwback to the fight with the chainsaw guy from the first game. Not all the challenges come solely from combat. The game's level design does mix it up now and then with different challenges. You might fight on an elevator trying to prevent monsters from destroying the brakes. You might be running from meteors falling from the sky, or fighting enemies on disappearing platforms. But no level is very interesting to look at. All of them mostly falling into the big empty space category that's similar to the other empty spaces in the game, except for the one level where it feels like you're running through someone's large intestine. Puzzles show up in the game, but have a simplicity to them that no one would find difficult. Often combat lies at the center of these puzzles, and sometimes involve throwing monsters on spikes or placing severed heads on altars. It's a sexy good time. It breaks up the combat alright. Platforming happens mainly in the 2.5D levels. Yeah, Splatterhouse has 2.5D levels. It's the best way to remind you that there are no more 2D games anymore. These levels harken back to the original game, and I enjoy them well enough. They're a combination of jumping to avoid obstacles and whacking enemies to death. These levels are difficult, but I found them to be good callbacks, and they broke up the game a bit, killing the monotony of the 3D levels. Much of the game is a linear experience, but it does occasionally provide small moments of exploration. If you search well enough, you can find audio recordings by Dr. West that flesh out his character and motivations a bit more. You can also find torn up pieces of photographs that Jennifer leaves as a trail of breadcrumbs for Rick to follow. There are 4 per stage, huge, and when you collect them all, you get to view the whole photo, and most of the time, those photos are photos of a naked or erotically dressed Jennifer. Yep, there's nudity in this game. Your reward for diligently searching your environment is to enjoy boobs.
Now, is there any greater incentive in the world than that?
Yep, boobs. It's a small reminder that this game was made back in a time before so many people got sticks in their butts.
Which of course leads me to my next point, that this game is very, very dated.
Now, I'm not saying boobs or enjoying boobs are dated. Boobs are classic. Boobs never go out of style. What I am saying is that Splatterhouse reeks of the era it was made in. The dated QuickTime events and God of War style gameplay aside, it has a lot to do with decisions elsewhere in the game. For instance, Rick looks like every guy my sister ever dated in high school. Douchebag goatee, douchebag chain, douchebag plaid underwear sticking up out of his pants. Who would fuck this guy? The game also has that saturated color look. The only color that has any vibrancy in this game is red, but nothing dates the game more than the music. Oh man, are you ready for some mid-2000s angst? Cause here it is. Now, Splatterhouse does have some great spooky music that sounds like an 80s horror film or the original Splatterhouse. This music usually pops up in the 2.5D levels, but does show up elsewhere. However, most of the game, especially during combat, features a large amount of licensed music. It's metal, but not good metal. The music takes you right out of the game, and often I just shake my head at it. It's dated. The music just screams, yes, this game was made during the decade of the tramp stamp. I don't think Splatterhouse deserves the bad reputation it has. The game went through a troubled development with the original developer doing some shady behind-the-scenes stuff, and Namco needed to reshuffle programmers around. The problems behind the scenes do show through in the game. Glitches plague this Splatterhouse and happen often. Sometimes I worried the game wouldn't let me continue and was permanently glitched out, and I wouldn't be able to continue. However, I did, and the game I experienced hadn't been the horrible game I'd heard about. During my playthrough, I saw moments of brilliance here and there had absolutely been things that I'm going to remember. It's clear that the people who made the game had a reverence for the genre. In the game, you can find references to H.P. Lovecraft, Freddy Krueger, The Wicker Man, and Evil Dead. And boy howdy, the development team took the name Splatterhouse to heart. Blood gets splattered everywhere in this game, including Rick in the screen. It's as if an architect just decided they would build a house made of blood and guts. And there's just gore and guts and body parts and all sorts of things everywhere in this house.
In the end, it's not a bad game. It's a bit derivative, it's a bit repetitive, it's a bit dated, but there are some good qualities to it. I mean, you can have fun with it here and there, and it does have the original 3 Splatterhouses on it, which is how I was able to actually play these games and review them. But it's okay. I think that you would like it if you played it, and it does have the one thing that really is most important of all: boobs. Hey, if you enjoyed this review, then check out my review of Narc for the arcade by Midway, or check out my review of Super Mario Bros. 3 Part 1. I enjoyed that game a lot, and I enjoyed making this review. Check it out.